Hi, I'm Jorin Lee, and this is a video on the cinematic influences behind 1998's classic Metal Gear Solid. It was a heavily Hollywoodized game for lots of reasons, so let's dive in.
Impressive, Snake.
The first movie we have to mention is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. Released in 1993, not only was Jurassic Park a great movie, it used a new form of special effects known as CGI. The technology behind it, made by a computer design company called Silicon Graphics, would also power both the Nintendo 64 and the Sony PlayStation. The console, of course, that MGS1 is on. So technically, Jurassic Park and MGS1 don't only tackle similar themes as science fiction, they're both also made using some of the same company's tools and workstations. For those who haven't seen it, Jurassic Park is about what happens when an eccentric billionaire's dream of building a theme park around de-extincted dinosaurs goes wrong. It's a disaster movie, a survival film, and a special effects smorgasbord all in one. Based on a book by Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park debuted at a time of newfound interest in the subject, not only of dinosaurs, but of evolution, genes, and DNA, as the early 90s was the era of the Human Genome Project. MGS1 would be about a different bipedal nightmare come to life by way of dystopian science, but like Jurassic Park, it would also be named Rex. MGS1, too, as much as Jurassic Park did, portrayed a disaster adventure on a remote and exotic island, and science experiments gone wrong. It too used the genre for scientifically informed speculation, questioning, just like Jurassic Park, whether the new fields of genetic engineering and CAD or computer-assisted design weren't risking the rise of new types of monstrosities like never before. Both would also rely on a rough, rather simplistic pop science to entice the imagination, and raise real ethical and philosophical issues along the way, while also remaining highly entertaining.
Impressive, Snake.
Next we have Predator. Starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, 1987's Predator was about what happens when a Special Forces commando and a ruthlessly advanced intelligent alien go head-to-head. It's a unique blend of action, horror, disaster, and sci-fi that pairs its more fantastic aspects with a well-grounded pseudo-realism. Arnold and the Predator stalk each other around some Central American jungle in plausible ways. The ironic twist to the premise is that for once, this is an asymmetrical conflict with the American on the weaker, lower-tech side. While Arnold covers himself with mud and improvises traps, the Predator uses energy weapons, and that most explicitly conjured about the movie by MGS1, stealth camouflage. But the level of the monster's intelligence is something the movie waits to reveal to amp up its scariness. We learn that the Predator all along has been stalking Arnold's unit. But the thing the movie keeps us waiting for until nearly the very end is the reveal of the Predator's awful reptilian face. But the biggest, best reveal Predator waits for is at the very end, when Arnold, aka Dutch, gets to finally try and ask the monster a question. When Dutch demands, "What the hell are you?" the Predator mimics this question back. Then, before nearly killing Dutch in a tactical nuclear blast, it mimics the sound of one of Dutch's dead friends laughing. In the end, this returned question by the monster enticingly suggests that the point all along for Predator was to show that the name of the film is ambiguous. Both of its co-protagonists are essentially the same. Both are predators. Metal Gear Solid would cultivate a similar heady brew of genres and traditions. It would feature its own stealth camo-wearing stalker and dark monstrosity, Grey Fox. But most of all, Metal Gear Solid would borrow from Predator the same moral subjectivity, by making the hero Snake and the villain Liquid, just like the hero Dutch and the villain, the monster with no name in the movie, two forms of the same essential substance.
Impressive, Snake.
The third film to discuss next for MGS1 is actually two, both of them Stanley Kubrick's. 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968 and Full Metal Jacket from 1987. Kojima has made his love for Kubrick no secret, and no list like this would be complete without both powerhouse influences. 2001: A Space Odyssey is an epoch-defining film that beggars belief, much less description, taking the viewer from the dawn of prehistoric man to the furthest reachable depths and leagues of both time and space. Mainly, 2001 is centered around the relationship between human space pilot David Bowman and spaceship computer HAL 9000. What develops into a kind of cat-and-mouse Cold War between the two further develops into a kind of man versus machine story, one that's ultimately, in fact, about defining what it means to be a human being, as that delightful, terrifying split between rationality and selfishness, intelligence and crude animal instinct. There's a lot of HAL 9000 in the story of Metal Gear Rex. Both are scientific achievements that in the end only reflect back all too clearly the depths of human folly, of our own fear and stupidity. Like Dave having to dismantle HAL's mind in 2001, by the end MGS1 is also a story about having to destroy utopian technology that's become the stuff of a sci-fi nightmare. 2001 and MGS1 are both ultimately asking what it means to be human, to be the future, and to be the future where human nature becomes something that we shape ourselves. From genetic engineering and nuclear proliferation in MGS1 to space travel and artificial intelligence in A Space Odyssey, these sci-fi classics portray our species on the brink of becoming that next stage beyond Homo sapiens, what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called the Übermensch, meaning the man or human who goes over themselves, who helps shape their own evolution. Apart from the names Hal and Dave, aka in MGS1 Otacon and Snake, the game also makes a nod to the film with the name of the submarine at the start. Like the ship from the film, it's named Discovery. Now, how about 1987's Full Metal Jacket? Full Metal Jacket plays out across two stories set during the Vietnam War, one in basic training, the other during the infamous Tet Offensive in the field. Their only point of contact is the ostensible protagonist, Joker. The boot camp chapter's real star, though, is Gomer Pyle, played by Vincent D'Onofrio. Watching him slowly go insane in this twisted 1960s-era Lord of the Flies-style boot camp introduces us to what will surely be a dark, twisted, and morally gray movie. Again, as in MGS1, Full Metal Jacket gives us the darker side of human nature. The violence, like a famous scene in 2001 when we see the bone a monkey's using as a weapon becoming the bone-like shape of a futuristic spaceship climbing high. The eras may change, our technology may advance, but in the end, as far as MGS1 or these movies by Stanley Kubrick go, so long as we're still human beings, some things will never change. The big scene in Full Metal Jacket alluded to directly by MGS1 is during the tense and epic urban sniper battle near the end.
Impressive, Snake.
Speaking of Vietnam, next there's the inspiration behind Snake's bandana, 1978's The Deer Hunter. Kojima asked for character designer Yoji Shinkawa to make Snake look like Christopher Walken from this film. Like MGS1, The Deer Hunter is a de-glamorized depiction of war, portraying the lives of several small-town friends whose lives are shattered by the war in Indochina. Yet again, as if the theme wasn't clear, we find a dark and epic expression of the human heart through the prism, as we did in Full Metal Jacket, of war. Like Predator and several others, we find a focus on American military dominance in The Deer Hunter, and the cost for the human beings on both sides of these conflicts who actually have to go and wage them. Yet, as famed film critic Roger Ebert said of the movie, The Deer Hunter is neither an anti-war nor a pro-war film, and perhaps the same could be said of MGS1. Like Full Metal Jacket, The Deer Hunter's depiction of warfare we might compare to a line from Melville's Moby Dick, when Ishmael admits that though he got swept up in the hunt like all the rest, he could see naught, or nothing, in the symbol of the titular whale Moby Dick, but the gravest ill. War is just some horrible, all-consuming monster in these stories. By the end of The Deer Hunter, war has even eaten the heart of our character Nick, played by Christopher Walken. Though traumatized by torture in a Viet Cong POW camp, by the end, war becomes a part of him. When lifetime friend Michael, played by Robert De Niro, goes back to Vietnam one last time to get Nick out, neither man will be the same that we met at the start.
Impressive, Snake.
Next up, we have another set of twin ancestors for MGS1, this time both starring the grandfather of spy action movies, Sean Connery. These are The Hunt for Red October in 1990 and The Rock in 1996. The Hunt for Red October is based on a novel by Tom Clancy, set in November 1984, when a rogue Soviet commander absconds with a next-generation class nuclear submarine. He becomes an enemy of both East and West. That submarine, the Red October, is detection-proof, making it a highly mobile stealth nuclear weapons platform. The US government becomes convinced the sub's captain, Sean Connery as Marco Ramius, is trying to start World War III. The only one to intuit the truth that Ramius is actually trying to defect with the sub is Alec Baldwin, playing CIA analyst Jack Ryan. Though set after the Cold War, MGS1 borrows a decent deal from The Hunt for Red October. Apart from the visual homage at the start of the game, Metal Gear Rex and its radar-proof railgun-fired stealth nuke is essentially the Red October on land. Moreover, the sense of dread of a coming nuclear attack, the premise of a rogue former legend apparently taking the world hostage, and other aspects like the focus on intelligence as a vital strand of military action are all borrowed, to some degree, from this film. Connery plays John Patrick Mason, a disgraced former British intelligence officer and SAS captain. He's known as one of the only people in history to have escaped Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary off the coast of San Francisco, even if eventually he was recaptured. Teaming up with Nicolas Cage as FBI biochemist Stanley Goodspeed, the pair are tasked with stopping the machinations on the island of Ed Helms as Brigadier General Francis Hummel. Hummel, a U.S. military leader turned terrorist traitor, is demanding a ransom, as well as for the government to support the families of his own former soldiers who have died in deniable covert or black ops. If these demands are not met, Hummel, having taken over Alcatraz alongside nearly 100 tourists turned hostages, plans to attack San Francisco with chemical weapons. Or at least that's what he tells the U.S. government. The connections between The Rock and MGS1 are considerable. Hummel transforms Alcatraz into the perfect stronghold, no less so than the sons of Big Boss on Shadow Moses. Goodspeed is forced into the field by the Pentagon to disarm the terrorist threat of mass destruction, a threat that terrorists gained in the film by raiding a U.S. military weapons depot. Though in The Rock, the WMD in question is rockets tipped with VX nerve gas, not, as in MGS1, a stealth nuclear weapon, the similarities are nonetheless striking. Just like in MGS1, in The Rock we follow along the infiltration and sabotage in real time. Mason is compelled to stay and fight when he learns the terrorist plan threatens the life of his daughter in San Francisco, somewhat like Campbell and Snake's motive of rescuing Campbell's niece from Shadow Moses, Meryl. The terrorists and the counter-terrorists in both works engage in a cat-and-mouse war of attrition. Like Snake and Meryl, in The Rock our heroes get captured. And along the way, a wider story in both reveals the government isn't as innocent or as victimized as it may have first seemed. In an echo of the involvement in Naomi's cover story of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, we learn in The Rock the real reason Mason was disgraced and locked up was he committed espionage against the American government, and specifically against J. Edgar Hoover. Mason stole microfilm from the FBI containing secrets on global events and political elites, secrets that could never be allowed to see the light of day. So in a coincidental glimmer of what today in places like Guantanamo Bay we call detained enemy combatants, Mason was locked up for life with no real charge and no trial. He swears giving up the microfilm almost certainly would have resulted in him getting killed and having that covered up as a suicide. In MGS1, of course, certain targets are secretly assassinated by the smart virus Foxdie, which disguises the death as a heart attack. At the end of MGS1, Secretary of Defense Jim Hausman nearly obliterates the island with a nuclear strike. In The Rock, when Plan A fails, the Pentagon's Plan B calls for, you guessed it, demolishing the island in an airstrike. Some of Hummel's men are mercenaries, and in the very end, Mason, with his long unkempt hair like snakes during the briefing, manages to escape by using the incident to fake his own death. All of these plot details and events would be echoed or outright copied by MGS1. Shadow Moses could even be mistaken for a prison.
Impressive, Snake.
Up next is 1992's Universal Soldier. Its director, Roland Emmerich, was one of Kojima's favorite American directors during the development of MGS1. Otacon's last name is actually an homage. Though we could have looked at several of Emmerich's movies, the clearest influence behind the game has to be Universal Soldier. The film begins, like a number on this list, in Vietnam. Two American soldiers, Luc Devroux and Andrew Scott, played by the era's two biggest action stars, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, seem to kill each other after Scott goes insane in the field, a la another key influence for this entire series, Apocalypse Now. That's when their bodies are secretly put on ice until the modern era, the post-Cold War 1990s. Then they are reanimated, becoming test subjects in an experimental super soldier project called Unisol, the Universal Soldier. In the present age, small-scale conflicts and terrorists are fought by elite special forces in an asymmetrical struggle no different to some degree than Vietnam. The Unisol subjects are supposed to be mindless automatons, kept dormant and controllable by mind-suppressing drugs. But the latent personalities of Devroux and Scott start to re-emerge. Scott thinks he's still killing civilians in Vietnam. Meanwhile, Devroux's good guy nature returns, leading him to pair up with a TV journalist, Veronica Roberts, who's investigating the shadowy truth behind the Unisol project. Together, somewhat similar to the movie's own primary influence, The Terminator, Devroux and Roberts have to take down Scott while dodging the military and police. There are many connections to be drawn between Universal Soldier and MGS1. The entire dystopian premise of the military, in its bid to create a cleaner, safer battlefield, harvesting the bodies and wrecking the minds of former US Special Forces officially killed in action, would be directly imported into the game, as would that of a showdown between two monsters created by the same American government top-secret program, stretching back to the Vietnam era, in MGS1's case being the Les Enfants Terribles project, behind the twin clones, of course, Solid and Liquid Snake. Universal Soldier even follows the same basic framework as every Metal Gear prior to 1998. Only by infiltrating the enemy base and uncovering evidence of the secret weapon there can Roberts and Devroux track down for answers one of the project's creators, who then tells them how ultimately to fight them. There's a particularly MGS-feeling moment when the pair discover a tracking device hidden in Devroux's leg. But the biggest connections between MGS1 and Universal Soldier are mostly thematic. Can the nicer, safer-seeming military of today ever truly rid itself of its own heritage, defy, as it were, its own genetic destiny? Or is the attempt to build a perfect, precise, and moral modern military machine fated to produce nothing but dystopia? Using the light poppiness of an action film framework to propel these deeper science fiction questions forward, Universal Soldier is just as subversive and popcorny as MGS1.
Impressive, Snake.
Staying on the Vietnam era even longer, next up comes 1976's All the President's Men. In case you haven't noticed, MGS1 is incredibly indebted not only to the period of Vietnam, but to its cinematic era known as New Hollywood or American New Wave. Beginning in the mid-60s and lasting up until the early 1980s, this new school of American directors like Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, and Francis Ford Coppola redefined the meaning of American movies throughout the Vietnam and post-Vietnam epochs. All the President's Men was this era's definitive portrayal of the Watergate scandal. Based on the nonfiction book written by the two real reporters involved, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, the film follows their investigation into election tampering, which leads by the end all the way to the top, a conspiracy implicating President Richard "Dick" Nixon. One of the pair's sources, and perhaps the most famous character in the film, is the shadowy, cigarette-smoking, faceless man who goes only by the cryptonym Deep Throat. Deep Throat tells Woodward and Bernstein to follow the money. This vital, if cryptic clue is what unlocks the whole caper. All the President's Men epitomize the outrage, the sudden awareness of conspiracy and government deception that defined the post-Watergate years. The player's progress in MGS1, meanwhile, towards gradually exposing a government cover-up, the game's sense of betrayal and subversion, it all comes, like Gray Fox's own cryptonym Deep Throat, right out of this movie.
Impressive, Snake.
Another key influence on Metal Gear Solid 1 from New Hollywood is Brian De Palma's 1978 paranormal thriller, The Fury. The Fury stars Kirk Douglas as a shadowy intel operative known only as simply Peter. Peter's son, Andrew Stevens, playing Robin, is a burgeoning psychic. The boy's unique abilities get noticed by Peter's employers, a mysterious and secret group within the American establishment the film never names. They try to have Peter killed, transferring custody of his son Robin to the Paragon Institute, a strange school for psychics and mediums based in Chicago. The film follows Peter's crusade to get his son back, as he sneaks and dodges his way around his former co-worker, Childress, played by the legendary American independent filmmaker John Cassavetes. Meanwhile, we also followed the story of Gillian, played by Amy Irving, of Carrie and Scarface fame, one of the Paragon Institute's newest recruits. The twist is that Robin, following years of mind-altering treatment and abuse without his father, has become a twisted monster we might compare to Tetsuo, a character from another large influence on Kojima, 1988's Akira. While aspects of Robin's story resemble that of characters like the Twin Snakes and Psycho Mantis, it was the film's depictions of psychics, mediums, and tele- or psychokinesis generally that inspired similar elements in MGS1. We might also honorably mention here two other related influences to close out this episode: the alien sci-fi series The X-Files, and the work of New Hollywood director who strongly influenced not only Kojima but also the Hauser brothers at Rockstar, Sam Peckinpah. While MGS1 would take some of its paranoia and secrecy from The X-Files, its world weariness and surprising emotional range for an action story comes straight out of the films of Peckinpah. But lastly, MGS1 was also directly and deeply inspired by French New Wave. In one cut exchange between Ocelot and Snake, when Ocelot says the first people to use shocks as torture were the French, Snake would have said, "I've seen a lot of French films, but I never heard that before." Les Enfants Terribles may be a nod to one of them, to the 1950 French New Wave film by Pierre Melville of the same name, Les Enfants Terribles. More than any one detail though, the biggest influence on MGS1 from French New Wave, which came of age after the Second World War, has to be its innovation of the auteur theory. Dev studio KCE Japan made MGS1 like only they could, like a French auteur would have made a French New Wave movie, authoring the game like a novel. That, in a nutshell, is auteur theory. Without it, MGS1 as we know it would simply not exist, and it came about thanks to the French New Wave. Well, that does it for now. Should this video receive 20,000 views in the first 2 weeks, I'll come back with more Movie Gear Solid. Until next time, boss.